Sup, party peoples out there in YouTube land? This is Roy Carter from Wrecktitution Media, and yeah, it's been a bit since I've done my last video, so figured I'd let everyone know what's going on. My handfuls of fans. Well, it's not like I ever plan on getting monetized for this stuff, because you start talking about politics, and especially out of the liberal bubble politics, then it's just a matter of time before you get targeted. So I'm just kind of doing this as obviously a one-take kind of thing where I don't really do much editing because I got no time for that. But yeah, so you people are just going to have to sit through and deal with my craziness, I guess, yeah. But yeah, I went to a Libertarian meeting. It was a lot of fun. I met Chris Swift, kind of living in a conservative riding as it is, so I think most people are going to be voting conservative anyways, but I think it's great to be able to get people to think about the possibility of a libertarian alternative. I mean, I'm myself, and I've always kind of been like leaning libertarian for a lot of things, but I always kind of like sided with like more kind of third party lefty kind of leaning political options here in Canada, which is the NDP. Mostly just because, because they're what they were talking about with their whole promise of protecting the middle class and stuff like that. But really, they don't really have a whole lot of interest in that, in my opinion. The local riding for provincial and federal was amazing. Just really super nice people that actually, even when it's not election time for those like 2 years in between. 2-3 years in between the provincial and federal elections, because we kind of have like a provincial, federal, and then after the federal, a couple years go by, then we have the provincial and the federal again, right? So unless a bunch of crap happens and there's like the old no confidence votes, right, for parliament, so then they go into one of those snap elections that end up costing people way too much money. But we have a lot more of those in kind of a third party system here in Canada, even though there's more parties than just three. It's just most people, I mean, even when you have that option, like I've said before, you give people that option of a two-party system. They'll go with a two-party system and still complain about having a third option. But you can have a multiple party system, like we have in here in Canada, and yeah, it'll split the vote a little bit different. Or in Europe, for example, in a lot of different countries, and you have many different parties, and people vote for what they find is kind of for them. And I think it's actually kind of good to have that selection. I mean, for people who are intellectual and actually know what they're voting for. But a lot of regular, average, working 9-to-5 people don't care about politics, know everything's corrupt with the government, but are just trying to get by and feed their kids and stuff. I think those people are kind of, are definitely the kind of mindset of what people, I guess the mainstream media or what political analysts would call the mob mentality, right? Because, obviously, let's say you have, you got a group of people that are kind of in the middle or whatnot, and so let's say they start raising taxes. Well, you start raising taxes, and then everything gets more expensive, and then it gets to the point where they're looking for that party that's going to lower the taxes, kind of thing. You also have the maybe there could be an area where there was like some sort of corruption or some gross negligence by some corporation, and they just got a slap on the wrist or whatnot, and you see more people that are wanting protectionisms for stuff like that, so they may go towards the more left-leaning ideologies that are promoting the whole man-made climate change hysteria and stuff like that. I mean, it's I mean, like I'm saying, the argument for climate change, I've definitely done like more well-versed videos on there with my societal manipulation series. I actually been meaning to do more of that stuff, but it's like, what's really the point? I mean, like on YouTube, you're really just kind of, I'm more just talking to myself right now and just documenting it, right? I mean, yeah, there's like people that'll watch this, but for the most part, it's it's YouTube right now is definitely a dying ground for for people that want to make careers out of it, but it's definitely still a platform for people that are just trying to get their voices out there to say what they want, and for people that have the time and don't mind listening to what people got to say, and that's hopefully the reason why YouTube will stick around for a bit if they kind of quit banning everyone. I mean, it's just this whole censorship has just been upgraded to such levels where I mean, Corbett's off Twitter now. It's Owen Benjamin. Of course, he was kind of a bit of a Twitter troll, but, it just goes to show you that you can't really say anything that's outside the liberal bubble. And, some liberal people were getting banned, but not nearly the amount of people that have been censored as right-leaning, alternative media or even non-statist platforms. I mean, what, now they did something to Philip DeFranco, and now he's all like, oh, I'm being censored by YouTube, and I don't know if I can do my channel anymore, people, so you're gonna have to give me more money, because, I just ran a campaign for Kickstarter, for a fundraiser to make my new show, and it already gave me, like, hundreds of thousands of dollars from people donating, but now I'm whining about it after this is the same vanilla bitch boy who fucking talks about, oh, Alex Jones and his tinfoil, oh, we gotta fight the reptilians and blah, blah, blah. He's been talking about internet censorship, and he's been saying that, been fighting for free speech for fucking decades, and, oh, no, it's okay to make fun of him because, he says a few things that, and he goes on some rants and shit like that every now and then that you don't like, or may, make him look batshit crazy. And, I mean, he's been more on point with a lot of main issues than the mainstream media has. I mean, it's been almost a complete flip, in my opinion, in 2016. It got to the point where, the mainstream media started doing the conspiracy theories. Like, no fucking evidence of Russia collusion. They're going into, like, his, like, personal fucking sex life and the sex life of lawyers that like, come on, man, who fucking cares? You want to go into some fucking skeletons in the closet. I mean, like, how come the media is not reporting on the, one of the Seth Rich, like, lead investigators that ended up being, like, almost assassinated, but some dude was working for the Department of Energy. He was a fucking ex-Marine. Like, come on. Like, you can't tell me that wasn't a fucking assassination to shut him up, to not try to find any fucking information what was going on with Seth Rich. And I think there's more evidence to suggest that it was a leak than it ever was for Russian hackers. I mean, yeah, okay, Guccifer or whatnot, or, you can go on about the fact that he was Romanian or Russian or some bullshit like that, but fucking, the guy also fucking exposed the fact that climate change with the East Anglia fucking papers were complete and total bullshit. Exposed Michael Mann talking about how you had to hide the decline in the fucking emails for the, to fudge their statistics. And you can definitely tell the difference between the IPCC reports between their first and their fucking third assessments originally. There's a huge difference, and that's manipulation of data. You can, readjustments all you fucking want to the yin-yang and wazoo, but it's not going to help your fucking argument if the data sets that you put out there and you based your whole fucking argument on gets adjusted to after the fact to make it look like, oh, you guys were somewhat in the ballpark and somewhat on the right fucking grounds. I mean, I don't doubt the fact that if you take out, like, a bunch of trees in an area, you're going to start causing desertification. Yes, we can definitely affect things on that level, but we also have to keep in mind that we're also been on this planet for a very small amount of time, and there's plenty of data from core sets through geology samples of times when it's been warmer or when it's been colder, for example, and times when coming out of an ice age, the sea levels are going to be slowly rising over a long period of time. And the temperature is going to be rising slowly over a small period of time. When they try to give you this whole, if the temperature rises 3 degrees overall, then all this stuff's going to happen and stuff like that, but they don't know. They have no fucking basis of it. If they knew 100% sure, then they'd be able to tell you the weather 3 months from now. But they can't. There's too many variables out there to be, like, that's why they have to do the percentage of accuracy for fucking weather. And then people, oh, weather's not climate. And, like, yeah, I understand that. But, I mean, on a long-term period of time of weather, that starts to become the climate. And for people who are pro-global warming and all that bullshit, they use every single freak fucking thing that happens as an excuse for their pseudoscience. And for me, that's just ridiculous. And a lot of other scientists out there believe the same thing for climate science. And the sad thing about it is that it's an ideology now. It's turning into a point where it's like, if you don't toe the line and you're a scientist beginning out in the field, you will be scrutinized. You won't get you might not get the grants you want. Sorry, I'm just recovering from a lot of different things here. Or you'll have protesters, like fucking Antifa and shit like that, show up and try to shut down your venues for trying to, if you have a conference, or trying to tell people about all the many different discrepancies, or even the other side of the global warming argument, really. I mean, you're not allowed to say that the people, the main proponents of this, the alarmism and what we need to do, are the same kind of people that want, to limit everything that you do and everything in your life on a daily basis. I mean, these are the people that want to put you in these tiny little coffin apartments, like I've said before, that whole Agenda 2021, 2030, that's been changed to kind of thing. There's a lot of these green groups that go around and do like these Sierra Club tactics where they try to do a little thing in your community and say, oh, what things would you like to see, and what things would you like to blah blah blah. And so then they'll be like, oh, well, we propose this and this and this, and then they get the public behind it. And then the thing about the public is that they might not even know what they're talking about. They're just like thinking that this group is gonna protect like the things that they value in their community. And to a certain extent, yeah, they do, but they also make it so that only like a select group of people have access to that. So it really is to be like, okay, we're going to protect it so you and your family can never go there. So we need to, like the Bureau of Land Management, how they're taking just acres and acres of land in the United States, and then they're coming up with that whole bullshit grazing rights fees when the owners to that land had grazing rights for generations, pretty much. And so kind of comes down to whether or not what your stance is on the on kind of like government control of like, I guess, environmentally protected lands or whatnot. Does that mean that we completely ignore the rights of the farmers that have been using, and the ranchers that have been using certain areas like in Nevada and stuff like that, which already has some pretty hostile climates? So I mean, if you have like a ranch that's close to a watering area, and your livestock likes to go to that certain area to graze, then it's a limited area. It's not like you can send them to graze anywhere else, because the next place may be about a good 10-15 miles. So I mean, it's it's not the farmers or the ranchers' fault for those kind of, in my opinion anyways, those kind of situations. And it's kind of messed up how the government, like the Bureau of Land Management in the States, says that they're going to do all this stuff for, they say, oh, well, we protect all these turtles and stuff like that, but they ended up having to cull half of them, and like they like had a bunch of like native artifacts that they were not taking care of properly, that were just collecting dust and decaying because they weren't properly stored. They've also been known to, I think they contaminated a huge stretch of like, the BLM has done some serious, like, messed up, they say accidents, but it's definitely bad mismanagement of what they got there for their whole Bureau of Land Management and stuff like that. It's not just like one group or like the EPA or whatnot, because it's good to have some sort of environmental protections to make sure that you're not like killing everyone and like polluting everything, and but it gets to a point when it becomes political, when it becomes politically motivated taxation, then it just becomes a shit show. And I've realized that the more you try to include government, the more red tape, the more bureaucratic, and the less you're able to get stuff done in the allotted amount of time that you need. And that's the problem with big government. That's why I like the libertarian argument, because I haven't really seen that many instances where a big and like a government that controls practically every aspect of your life is beneficial to the people. Or beneficial to freedom, for that matter, And I'm not completely libertarian, because I do believe you need to have borders in your country to make sure that you're not accepting a welfare class into your system and kind of bankrupting the money from taxpayers that's already going to pay a ridiculous debt that we only borrowed maybe 8% of originally. And I think that if libertarian principles were to be actually applied and done correctly, and when you think about the amount of money that would be saved, hey, maybe you'd be able to make your country to the point where you're doing so well and your economy is booming to the point where you actually need a demand of foreign skilled workers. Then by all means, bring them over. I have no problem with that. I don't care what race, religion, or culture they are, as long as they're not trying to impose their, like Sharia law when they come over here. That's the only thing I really have a problem with Muslims, is the whole, when they try to make it a political thing and then try to impose like Sharia courts or have like their own separate legal system. And I don't care what you believe in tolerance or whatnot. You see, for me, I'm not really, like I said before, I'm not religious. I'm agnostic, so I keep the open mind, and I have no problem with people who follow their religions and stuff like that. It's just when, it gets to the point where they try to, impose it on other people, or try to make it so that they're, free of the legal system that we all have to follow. Hey, the legal system itself is pretty damn corrupt, and definitely it's a lot of things that it needs to be overhauled, but, in one way or another, it's that line that we have where, it's either that or fucking Law of the Jungle, and, it's good. There's all kinds of different laws out there. There's natural law, there's human law, there's a there's a lot of different laws out there. Unwritten books and written books, if you know what I mean. So it's up to us to realize which ones are more meaningful and which ones actually kind of help maintain society and which ones just perpetuate a bureaucracy, money-making scheme of bilking people to pay for different things. And so that's pretty much why I've kind of just had enough of the leftist kind of arguments of things, because for me, I understand where people are coming from. I understand being in high school, that whole thing where they say you're like a lefty till you're 30 and then, like all that crap. But it's kind of true in my case, just because, like, when I was young, I first found out, I was always kind of interested in politics, but I had a lot of stuff going on in my life when I was a teenager, so I was trying to, like, work that shit out. But I met, like, a good friend of mine in high school who was, he's Chilean, so, I found out all about the Augustus Pinochet thing, and just kind of, I kind of started going towards communism and Marxism, because I'm thinking, well, you know what? If I was in power and I had the possibility, I wouldn't look for, like, the idea of communism for me was like, oh, this is awesome, because then I could, like, have all this wealth and stuff and share it with everyone, because I know I'm not the kind of person who takes more than what I need, really. Maybe when it comes to food, but not when it comes to like money and resources for like an actual nation and stuff. And so it kind of puts you into that whole kind of like benevolent dictatorship, right? And like, you know, the whole ideology of the working class and sticking it to the rich. You know, I grew up really poor, not so much as like 100% because of my family, but a lot of that had also to do with some of the poor choices of gambling and stuff like that, so we never had any money. So I kind of grew up with a bit of a grudge against rich people, because I grew up in like, you know, really poor neighborhoods and stuff like that, but I never like, you know, would do anything about it or like, you know, start crap. I was always a pretty decent kid, but I would start fights if people mess with me and stuff, and would also be pretty cocky sometimes, so I'd say some things. But I mean, that's kind of how it is when you're a kid, you know. It's like when you're young, you know, if you have any kind of independent qualities, you get made fun of, because, you know, when you're young and you're learning stuff, you're meant to be, you know, everyone's supposed to be, you're supposed to be like everyone else. Because that's pretty much how school educates you and kind of indoctrinates a lot of people, you know, because it's like, oh, well, that's social development. And to a certain degree, yeah, because we are social animals. So it's impossible to escape from that element of, you know, kind of that group mentality, which is something that we always have to make sure that when, you know, if you have any kind of educational system, that you're trying to make people think for themselves. But, you know, sadly it's gotten to the point now where it's just a conveyor belt. You know, when you're dealing with teachers, I was talking to a few people that were just saying, hey, it's a odds game, you know. Hopefully you can teach enough out there that'll get out there and get the skills they need. But, you know, you're always going to have those problems with other people, and then you always have those other problems with teachers who may not be 100%, you know, versed with dealing with kids and stuff. And then you've always got that percentage of people who are just assholes, you know. It's a wonderful makeup of the human race, really. We can't all be winners, but we can all be characters. But anyways, sorry for all the coughing. Been walking back and forth in this crazy last bit of winter weather that we've been having with the ice and the bloody snow and everything. It's been a nightmare. So, got a little congestion in my lungs still from everything. But, yeah. I mean, current events right now. Syria. Wow. Closest we've ever been to World War III in quite some time. I think since 2013, when everybody was worried about Miley Cyrus's little freak out at the VMA Awards when he almost, you know, went to war with Russia. People cared more about her shaking her ass. I've made that joke many different times, but it's true. It's a good talking point, because it just highlights how insane, you know, humanity is. Because I believe in the 60s and the 80s, in the Cold War, there was that fear of, like, nuclear Armageddon is imminent, you know, and even though it never happened, and it was mostly kind of related to and kind of, like, disregarded as fear-mongering, it still put that possibility in people's minds that shit could possibly happen. You know, it's, like, there's like, different types of fears out there. You can have fears that are really kind of illogical and just irrelevant to your safety, and you can have legitimate fears. There's legitimate fears out there that we could go to World War III, and going to World War III with Russia is not a good thing, because, I mean, everyone thinks traditionally, classically, that, oh, if they were to, you know, fire their ICBMs or whatnot, but there's tons of satellites up and space debris up in orbit. Do you really think that the United States government, or even the United Nations, for that matter, or NASA, can track every single one of those satellites and know exactly the components of those satellites and whether or not they may have an electromagnetic pulse device on them, for example? You know, I mean, yeah, they can maybe check for nuclear radiations or whatnot, but if you have an electromagnetic pulse weapon, you can easily disable a good chunk of North America. And all those chips, like, you're talking about, Silicon Valley would have to practically well, what we'd have to do is take a hold of prime mining resources and build up the infrastructure here in North America from scratch, pretty much, you know? And there are a few chip manufacturers and, like, a few places where in the States I was looking online, doing some research to find out what companies they have in case, you know, there was ever, like, a war with China or whatnot, what that would do. But it would definitely put us out of the loop for a good portion of at least a good 5 years before anyone could do anything in North America without any electronics and stuff like that, to be able to build up the infrastructure and everything for the transformers and all that stuff and get the foundries running and all that jazz. So, yeah, there's definitely that aspect of things. China would definitely have a good 5-year head start on us because they've practically got the production means there. And it's not so much as the cheap production. Because, mind you, China's really fucking smart at stealing patents. And if they really wanted to, they could go and take all of the components and even offset the Japanese components, which is one of the biggest costs of cell phones and electric devices in general usually goes to Japan. A lot of people think China because, you know, they do a lot of the production, but the thing is they've devalued their currency and they rely on such cheap production costs that it really don't matter. And also they bought up so much U.S. debt that if they really want to dump treasuries, like, I don't know, man, this whole World War III thing could just not work out good at all. There's so many different ways where it could just go wrong. Not just, like, physically, but economically, you know, it's crazy times we live in. And it's weird seeing how just there's been so many different... you can definitely see where the neocons are coming out. I'm noticing, because you've got, like, the Democrats, too. It's not just the conservatives. There's a lot of establishment, deep state Democrats and Republicans that want to go to war with Syria. That want to, you know, see whether or not Russia's going to, you know, go into World War III. And the thing about Russia, they go into a war with the States or the West. I mean, is China going to get into there? Because if China gets into there, or India, or... Because you got to understand, they're the BRICS Bank. They're, you know, like... I could see them sticking together in a times of war, you know? It's the kind of financial allegiances that were, you know, around, even when you, like, want to look at, like, different aspects of World War I or World War II with the Japan oil embargo, you know, and just a lot of other things that kind of led to that. And, you know, you also had the Bolsheviks with the bankers kind of funding that whole thing too, with the whole train full of gold with Stalin and you know, it's just there's a lot of different forces at play that are controlling things behind the scenes. And why it's kind of interesting is we're not getting the correct information from the mainstream media anymore. There's no objectivity, and it's crazy. I was watching, you know, a lot of people like are putting this whole thing in Syria on Trump, and yeah, hey, he's definitely turned on what he said he was going to do. He had many different tweets out there saying why it's just not a good idea to go into Syria. So, I mean, this is the most dangerous 4D chess you could possibly ever think of right now. So hopefully they're figuring stuff out. But I mean, they've stopped fight. Like they were fighting ISIS apparently. So they're done fighting ISIS, and now they're fighting Assad. I mean, Assad was fighting ISIS, and yet we were fighting them the whole time, and the West was supporting and covering for the fact that the Free Syrian Army and ISIS itself is used 52 different times on record, I think, of using chemical weapons. And it's you know, I mean, Corbett reported on a huge cache of ISIS weapons that they managed to clear out when they were, you know, they weren't able to scuttle or get rid of, and a lot of those weapons had made in the USA. It was an obvious that some of the missiles and the stuff that McCain and his boys were sending over, you know, was making its way into the hands of ISIS. And people who are more bold to say would, like me, I do believe that under the Obama administration, they decided to start funding radical Islam and start trying to manipulate it to use it to their own means. Really, I mean, just look at like Baghdadi, the al-Baghdadi, that guy from, what was it, like? I think he was in the UK, and they actually had a place that was like specifically training that MI6 knew for fucking years that they were training Wahhabist terrorists there, and they did absolutely nothing. And in fact, some cases actually backed, so it's just sad. It really is, because once you start trying to get your hands into like, take the CIA, trying like as far back as the 60s and 70s. With the whole Escobar situation, and then afterwards with the Sinaloa cartel, I mean, it's crazy how we've gotten to such a point where a lot of the illegal and dark, crazy stuff that happens is being done under the cover of CIA, FBI influence, or MI6, Mossad, different parts of the world. I'm not going to say it's all, all the Jews, because I see so many people out there are like, oh, it's all the Jewish Zionist conspiracy. All these people are Jewish. It's like, yes, okay, there's a disproportionate amount of Jewish representation in the world with both, you name it, but they're not the only groups out there. You have to keep in mind that there's many different groups at play, and they don't all agree with each other. They all want some sort of, centralized kind of UN-like kind of financial control where they kind of limit your choices and make money off of there, where they can choose the winners and the losers pretty much. So if you don't follow what they want, then they can easily make it to the point where you can never do anything to innovate for yourself and get your own kind of company and make your own kind of life. And that's what I do have a lot of problems with the government control. I mean, I definitely believe that you need some regulations in so that people aren't just taking advantage and of like either the workers or their environment and stuff like that, or the market, for example. But I mean, how would we even go to a free market? I mean, when the U.S., for example, and the European markets, who are very heavily controlled by EU regulations, are, they have things set up. Take the bond market for gold and silver, for example, which is a prime reason of why the price of gold and silver has been so manipulated to the point where it is today. I mean, do you really think that Fort Knox has got gold in there? I mean, we just admitted that Trudeau sold like tons and tons of gold out of the Canadian Treasury. It's all going towards China, and they're backing their money with gold. And the U.S. has backed their money with the petrodollar, which is failing and is unsustainable over a very long period of time. So, I mean, China's going to come out on top unless their people start getting wise to the better living conditions and start realizing, hey, maybe we need to, uproot our government, like the Hong Kong umbrella protests and stuff like that. Because keep in mind, Hong Kong and the rest of, or was it? Yeah, I think it was Hong Kong. Yeah, they've always kind of had a different agreement. They've had more freedom compared to the rest of China for the longest period of time. So I think the biggest threat to China right now is its own people getting wise to just the Orwellian censorship. Like, they've like completely erased any mention of any of those umbrella protests that I was talking about, even though they happened fairly recently, a few years ago. And also just like the Sesame credit that they're trying to put in right now, which is pretty crazy. It's like, it'll like dock you and like not allow you to travel if you don't if you're anti-government, or if you say anything that they don't agree with or whatnot, or feel like, so, and if you happen to know people who are dissidents or whatnot, or speak out against some of the corruption in the Chinese government, then your score goes down just by knowing them. It's a really, really sketchy kind of way to gamify society and turn it into a system where the suck-ups are obviously gonna do everything they can to get as much points and as much favor, as much free stuff or opportunities that they can get out of that system. And there's gonna be those class of people who are anti-authority, who end up gonna be left in the wayside. I mean, sorry. And that's a scary way of doing things, because we need rebels in a lot of different respects. We need those people that are like really brilliant, and hey, they may not be the best with people, but they can see what's wrong with the system, or they can see what's wrong with the company, or any kind of, well, I might as well say system, because when you think about how the way that multiple groups we operate on a social level, whether or not it's business, whether or not whatever goal we're trying to achieve, there's a social system involved in that. And you need certain types of people who can go into a situation and be like, okay, I can see what's wrong here, and fix things to a certain way where it makes things better, and it advances human acknowledgement, or procedures, or makes things more efficient. There's a lot of different components, and there's so many different types of. It's one of those scenarios where you can throw a bright person into kind of like somebody who just happens to have a knack for something, whether or not it's management, whether or not it's a people person that can work things out or whatnot, people that do know what they want to do. And I mean, nowadays, because of just everything in the gig economy and whatnot, it's harder and harder to find those kind of people. But I mean, there's buddies of mine who Will, a friend of mine from high school, who knew that he wanted to do carpentry, he was really good at it, and he went right into it. Now he's making tons of cash, and I mean, the guy could probably build a house from the ground up if he wanted to now, which is a really cool skill to have. And is you're always going to get those people who are good, who may not 100% always fit the grain, who may actually see a couple things, maybe better methods of doing things. Those people you're going to need in society. But it's kind of gotten to a point where when you look at kind of communist kind of control structures, and or even just kind of like the fake capitalism kind of crony oligarchical kleptocracy that we live in now, when you kind of think about it, it's, even though those people are finding it harder and harder to do their thing and to get out there, you can't stop that kind of aspect of you can never take that out. And if you do take that aspect of people who may be a little out there, maybe a little crazy, maybe a little off the wall, and just kind of disregard them completely, or put them into a mental institution, or ruin their lives completely, then you're just going to be stuck in just this it's not humanity, or it's almost like you're creating a machine, of just, you go to this one building for 20 years of your life, then you move on to this other building, this big building that maybe goes 50 stories up, and then you're starting on the first couple floors, and you gotta work your way up there, and then when you get to the, maybe the 40th floor, maybe you don't have the, a few things have gone wrong or whatnot, and you haven't been able to advance or whatnot, then you've practically got to accept that you're going to be like that for your whole entire life until you find something, that's similar, or the company's not doing, copious amounts of cocaine, bad business practices up on the top 2 floors, right? So you kind of just hope and pray that you got yourself a long-term way of feeding your family and sustaining yourself. And to me, that's not really living. You know what I mean? Sure, there are people that can find joy and happiness, and there's a lot of people that I've talked to that say that, their lives were pretty much just empty and meaningless until they decided to have kids, and then they live for their family. And I totally respect that. For some people, that, like, for people that do it really well and they're raising their family and they really genuinely care and love each other, that's awesome. But that's the thing, is that there's definitely an element of society and human knowledge that's going to take advantage of that, the knowledge that people want to feed their family and stuff like that, and will use that to manipulate human, knowledge for its own kind of nefarious means. And it's not always such a bad thing, because free enterprise and entrepreneurship and kind of striking out in your own kind of thing, or even just working at a company is in itself, at first kind of like one of those things where it's like, for the individual, it's like, okay, great, I'm getting up, I'm getting ahead, I'm doing the stuff, I may not have as much time now, but I've got a sustained income, I've got stuff planned out, I maybe can save a little bit of money and maybe get ahead, depending on how well you're doing. And I mean, it used to be the whole thing of capitalism as well. The longer you stay in a job, the better you get at it, the higher you get up in the thing. But that's not the case anymore. It's not the average guy who's been working 30 years at a company that's putting a lot of the decisions into a lot of stuff. Maybe for the trades businesses and contractors, yeah, because you value, after 30 years on certain job sites for your profession, you've practically seen every shit you could possibly think of. But when you have emerging markets, you have tech companies and stuff like that, and there's this whole digital expansion and just these startup companies that maybe only last a few months, and go bankrupt. And, it's a whole different ball game. It's really it becomes that gig economy. And so, in a certain respects, that's why I have a lot of pride in the fact that we have like trades schools and stuff like that, because that's skills that we're always going to need for the most part. And I mean, we could try to offset it to automation as much as we want, but we lose a good part of ourselves when we're looking at that kind of aspect of controlling our own destiny and having that kind of stability. Some people will end up kind of being like, well, I don't like this instability, so I'm gonna, the job that I'm working at may be shit, I may not be getting what I want in life, but at least it's stable, and there's people that will choose that. But there's also people that are like, hey, I'm young, I'm a young urban professional, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff and degrees behind me, and when I want to go in the field, and you've got all this potential, you may be totally fine with working some jobs that will maybe make him some decent money in the long run, or in the short run for that matter, or you might have some failures, but you've got that flexibility. You're not afraid to. It's not like you got a family of four and mortgage payments and stuff like that to make or whatnot. So you get a lot of that flexibility out there. So it's kind of interesting when you're looking at just kind of like the fact that a lot of the baby boomers are going to be going soon, with a great generation, but it's definitely going to be changing up the dynamics of things. It's definitely going to change the dynamics of voting. I could definitely see a lot more in the next maybe 10, 20 years kind of leaning towards left, but there's also and this is just a kind of like a generalization of a global kind of trends that I've been noticing with a lot of different countries and stuff. But I do believe that the more there's always going to be that kind of bit of the more left or right you go in a lot of scenarios, the more there's going to be that backlash if things don't work out properly, or if certain people are getting screwed, which never really happens. No, there's never usually any kind of 100% kind of method of doing things where everyone's satisfied. Like there is, it's going back to like the old barter system where you make sure that or like you where every kind of thing where it's like this is worth a certain amount of this kind of thing, even when you're talking about the basics of money, where there's an equal amount of exchange in value that's being shared. Now we don't have that because every dollar that's printed has been borrowed and a good portion of that purchasing power has gone towards paying off banks that are already rich enough as it is. You put in the taxes, you put in all the different regulations and stuff that makes it so it's hard for people to maybe pass that book around or to do that kind of business exchange. So the value of that dollar or the money that you're paying somebody is significantly decreased over a long period of time. I mean, when you take into consider inflation, that little minimum wage thing, we're still practically might as well be in the 70s for things. They're still paying a shit ton of cash, but their dollar's still being devalued more and more, and so that's kind of interesting. So it's kind of switched over from like the whole Syria thing to that. There's been a lot of crazy stuff that's been going on, though. I mean, here in Canada, we got like Rebel Media, which is kind of like the only really conservative like media outlet, if you can call it that. It's kind of like very small potatoes, grassroots, but they managed to make about 1.5 million in donations and stuff like that. So, I mean, I know there's been plenty of people on, and I've done videos before that have done skepticism, and the whole fact that a lot of people have been leaving the Rebel too. They decided to hire Sebastian Gorka, and there's been a few times where on Fox and like a few times where I've seen what he's had to say, despite his like monotonous like droning voice. Talking to you, Sebastian, blah 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 blah. We need to go into Syria. The founding fathers were for wars of intervention. He just talks like really monotonous, and maybe that's just a really bad impersonation of them, or maybe a good one. I don't know. I'm kind of sick right now, so you guys will have to judge. But he came out and on Fox a few days ago, and this is what really kind of lost a lot of credibility for me, is he started coming out and saying that the founding fathers would have been all for going into like Libya and Syria, to spread freedom to them, trying to use like a really bad argument. And I just like, does the guy never read like the actual quotes of the U.S. founding fathers? Because I like, they were pretty much against foreign intervention wars, especially at the first the first 30 years of the establishment of the freaking United States government. So I don't know. It's just definitely lost a lot of credibility there. And I'm kind of seeing with this whole Syria thing, I mean, people talk crap about InfoWars and stuff, but David Knight and Owen Shroy, there's been some great criticism of Trump, and they're fans of Trump. They got on the bandwagon for the only time that I can actually remember, aside from Ron Paul for the Libertarian movement. And I mean, that's kind of, when you think about it, is yeah, okay, but it's still kind of a protest thing. But I mean, the whole time that InfoWars has been in practically been on air, they've been kind of anti corruption, anti kind of both parties. I mean, he ended up getting arrested for protesting Bush, Alex Jones, I think, at one point. And so that's why I think it's kind of interesting when everyone's like, oh, the alt-right, the far-right conspiracy theories, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, no, he's only technically, far-right now, alt-right now, I guess you can kind of consider that, because he, supports Trump. And even, if you look at the people, if you go to, the Daily Stormer fans, and, people who are kind of more alternate, very far-right, but are, and maybe even have some neo-Nazi racist tendencies and the stuff that we don't really, I think most people in today's society know is just kind of, not cool. And it's just, well, not so much not cool, just, judge people lest ye not be judged kind of thing, judge people how you want to be, treat people like you want to be treated kind of thing, right, and all that jazz. I mean, most people nowadays don't care about interracial, couples or marriages or kids for that matter. It's not a big deal, as opposed to like 60 years ago or whatnot. And especially the newer generations, people don't care. But there is also kind of like, I noticed like around, like kind of like the a newer generation, not just the millennials, but a generation that's kind of starting to see just how kind of crazy left everything is and are kind of a little bit more conservative. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because you're going to have these ebbs and flows. But ultimately, you know, there is a progression that's going socially towards the acceptance of LGBT lifestyles, towards interracial, you know, like all this stuff that's being perpetrated by fear is mostly done by the media. Most people don't care about a lot of the stuff that they talk about, but you know, when they bring it to attention and they make a big deal about it, they make it as if this is your the reason for life itself, then people get a little indoctrinated. Like they had this one guy who just set himself on fire, who apparently, I was looking into his thing, he's done a lot of like LGBT rights stuff that is actually really good. But when you have a media that's lost all objectivity whatsoever and has brainwashed a lot of people into believing that, you know, either Trump is Hitler or, you know, the Republicans playing the counterpunches, the devil's advocate, because there was a decent amount of Machiavellian kind of tactics, and a lot of, like, I guess you could call Trumpisms of, like, where he, like, decides to make nicknames for people, and apparently that's just big with Americans. You know, like Animal Assad or whatnot, like, which is just getting kind of really thin in my books, because, you know, if it's true to the person's character, then yes. And I'm not saying that Assad is a fucking angel by any way. No, it's a civil war. He's definitely been bombing hospitals. But, I mean, the thing about it, too, is that, you know, you got these terrorists that use schools and hospitals as kind of hiding in there because they think that, oh, well, if they don't bomb us, well, then that's good because, you know, we're not going to get killed. But if they do bomb us, well, we can just blame it on the fact that they bombed a hospital. And if they're going to bomb us anyways, then at least you claim that moral high ground, right? You know, it's a warfare tactic now but it's the kind of warfare tactics of really cowardly kind of people, not kind of the warfare tactics that you would think on the battlefield, you know, or even in a destroyed city, you know, going building a building kind of fighting like that. Like if you were to take, for examples, Mogadishu, Somalia, the whole Black Hawk Down, that whole scenario, or you know, many different times where there's been, or take the World War II example of what was it, Stalingrad or Leningrad or whatever they decided to name it, but yeah, Stalingrad, when it was first like, that was a crazy amount of warfare where people were fighting kind of like through sniper warfare, through building to building, you know, small arms to mid-range arms, you know, it was just fighting with everything they could. Some cases where, you know, it was hand to hand, and that's kind of what a lot of people think about, like the kind of warfare tactics. But the warfare tactics nowadays are just completely mind blowing. You know, there's 100 different ways that they can go after you now, whether or not it's cyber warfare, or fucking, you know, like actual warfare, or if they want to do some like what do they not non-linear, but or like, you know, like there's like a full spectrum of ways that they can control things, or either affect the way that the public thinks about you or you think about yourself. In some cases it's pretty crazy. So, but yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that right now. It's hopefully the world doesn't go into chaos and all that jazz. I've been talking for a while now, so I guess I'll kind of just do that and post my rant out on YouTube. So good thing I didn't have to edit anything again. I was able to actually come up with some stuff that I can talk through for a decent amount of length. So anybody who is listening to this, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Don't think people would actually take the time to listen to my rants. But I know I keep saying I've been meaning to do this, but I really do need to kind of go back to doing my more focused videos and stuff where I did like kind of like some more editing as opposed to just like running a camera while I'm playing online games, ranting about stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much. Keep on rocking in the free world, party peoples, and I will talk to you later. Peace.